If you're trying to grow any vegetables or any live crop or cannabis, hemp, anything like that, anything that you're trying to produce a flower, you really need some organic matter to that soil. It can't just be minerals alone, because the organic matter helps break down those minerals, and that's what actually brings the minerals to your plant, and learning to work with the microbes as well. So the other thing is where do you want your values to be at in terms of like calcium, magnesium, potassium, phosphates, things like that are essential to your plant value. And so it all breaks down to a percentage. But again, looking at a lot of different soils, some of them are very, very depleted in the sense that they only have a few parts per million of different amendments, and some of them can have several thousand parts per millions of something. And so you have making sure that you have the right percentage base. You want to have a calcium dominant soil, and you have to have a proper amount of organic matter in there to keep it healthy. From there, your magnesium and your potassium, things like that, that are essential to plant growth, essential in the photosynthetic process. But if they're too high in the sense that your soil is potassium rich or magnesium rich, you're going to have lockout right from the beginning. So if you're a gardener or grower, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because you put a plant in the ground and you think it's going to do good, and it does good for a certain amount of time, and all of a sudden something just changes on it. And often that's a result of your fluctuations. Maybe you have too much of something or not enough of another, your exchange capacity is off, and different things like that. So starting with a soil test in that sense is really, really wise, especially if you're regenerating a soil, because if you're regenerating a soil, what did your plant uptake in the process of growth in that sense? And so there's a lot of different ways to up the nutrient value of your soil. Different companies like Grow the Soil have, do different amendments. A lot of garden suppliers, will provide different amendments. They have like these fertilizer pellets and things like that. But I like to remind people that what you want in your soil is raw minerals. You want real organics and raw minerals. And so finding those in different sources can be pretty important there.
Back to the right. Back to the right.
So I wish I could pull up a slide, because it would be a lot easier, because I could show you some of these interesting values that I've had here. But I really wanted to talk about these because they're, like I say, it's really important in the sense that if your fluctuations are off, if you're not having the right ratios of elements in your soil, you're going to have problems right from the get-go. And so people focus on different feeding programs and try to chase things all kinds of ways, and that's not necessarily fun to do. So avoiding that chase is what we want. So you test your soil and you realize that you need some nutrient value, you need something to your soil, you need organic matter. So people ask, how do we get this value up? Learning to compost is the best thing that you should do if you have your own property, is learning composting and learning how to compost your different vegetable products. You could get some chickens, you could get some bunnies, and you could work with some of their manure too. And learning how to turn over those piles and regenerate them. And so what I like to do is take my used soil and turn it in with more compost, more minerals when it's done. If you think about what your plant is uptaking, it's uptaking the main minerals that it needs. It eats up a lot of the organic matter through the process. It eats up a lot of the calcium through the process, some potassium and some phosphates. But again, we have to be very, very careful. So potassium and phosphates is one that people can chase after, and it's really, really hard. Potassium and phosphates are actually some of the harder nutrients to get to your plants. And so if you're lacking those, trying to get those in liquid form or various other forms, it just doesn't work. And so all kinds of gardeners struggle in that sense. And so it's very important in that sense that you have these proper values in your soil to begin with. Otherwise, like I say, you'll just be chasing it. Sodium's another thing to look up in your soil, because as you get too much salt buildup, your nutrient value could be great, your organic content could be great, but if you have too much sodium in your soil, then you're starting to push a sodic realm, and that'll immediately cause lockout in your plants, and you'll have struggles from there as well. So each of these mineral values plays an extreme role in that sense that, you know, if you're throwing it off, you're throwing it off. And it's very interesting to see how these plants react. And when they come up with these deficiencies, they say it takes 2 weeks for a plant to identify a deficiency. So how do you correct it at that point, you know? So starting with a proper soil or a soil test in that sense makes a lot of sense. So when we build a soil, we like to focus on compost variety. So not just having one source of compost, but having multiple sources of compost. People are quick to just throw manure and back guano or cow manure and back guano because they think that that's the best or that's what they should be doing. But you can put some of those in there, but cow manure carries a lot of bad bacteria in it as well, so I've kind of steered away from using heavy sources of cow manure and focusing on other sources of manure, you know, alpaca, chicken, bunnies, those types of manures, getting the manure variety in your soil. So if you can find and source out some different, it's interesting too when you start going down the whole. You can find local farmers that'll be glad for you to come out there and take different minerals from them. And so if you have some land that you're trying to spruce up and you don't have all the resources, you can actually find these resources without having to spend all the money. You just have to take some extra time and effort to go out there and find things. The other thing that could be a big problem is having too much sulfur in your soil. Sulfur is an interesting thing because where does it come from? And so some people, like I say, I'm talking very specifically on regenerative farmers that have been working with a specific plot of land or a specific amount of dirt for a period of time. It's interesting, but the sulfur content can go up over time, and that'll also cause very bad problems for your plants. And so in order to get rid of sulfur, you basically have to dilute it with more compost variety, but adding more cow manure is going to affect you in the opposite realm. So that's where you want to be careful, you know, just spreading manure across your land. You want to make sure you're using a variety in the sense there. Do you guys have any questions? Let's take that. Do you have any questions about working in soil?
Is there any way to like correct any of those nutrient deficiencies with like cover crops? A lot of people would do some clovers or different things like that.
Yep. So that is exactly the role of cover crops. Is it helps balance nutrient value in your soil. They will uptake excess. If there's like a mineral that's too rich in your soil, then they can take up the cover crop. The cover crop will start to take up some of that extra excess nutrients, so it's not too rich in your soil. And then if the soil becomes depleted, then it can start to share some of that nutrient with it. Marianne, you've been working your land for a very long time.
You mean the one outside?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you had your land tested yet?
Not outdoors. I've done my indoor beds.
Yeah.
I mostly just it's the back heated style garden where it's compost and then wood chips, like 6 inches of compost.
Yep. Yeah, that was the other point I wanted to make is putting in that work in the fall. If you have a piece of land after you're done harvesting your crops, you know, a lot of times people just want to wash their hands and be done with the project and move on. But if you have the resources to add some more compost, some wood chips, and start working in different manure and mulch layers, and you know, and realizing that the plant, you know, obviously took some of the nutritive value, but the one that you can throw at it the hardest is calcium. You can throw pretty hard calcium at it, but dolomite lime will also push your soil and raise your pH. So adding too much calcium in that sense could be bad. So you want to make sure you use different mineral varieties. Like when we mix the soil here, at our store, we add over 40 different resources to our soil, and that's going to change over the course of the next year as well, because I truly believe in finding mineral variety, and so mineral variety comes from a lot of really great places. You know, it can come from magma chambers, it can come from the bottom of the ocean floor somewhere, it can come from a cave, it can come So, you know, sourcing out some great mineral values has been a great pleasure of mine, so that I can have different things to work with and add different things to the soil to help break it down over time. And just yeah, it's just toying with different things and seeing what works the best. But I kind of thought there'd be a few more people that would ask a few more questions. But anyways.
Would you recommend using worm castings?
Oh, of course I recommend using worm casting. Everything is a worm cast base, so I actually I believe in worm castings, especially a proper company that, you know, knows how to work a worm casting. So a company that we've worked with is Wormies out of Grand Rapids, and they're a true vermicompost company in the sense that they seek out a lot of the manure that we're talking about and they use it in their worm casting process. And so what they've done is make that manure extra available to the plant. So it's not just simply a worm casting, it's finding a proper vermicompost company that can break all this material and make it available to you. So I'm heaviest on worm castings out of all the compost variety, because it should have the compost variety in it. I shouldn't have smoked that big one before I came up here. I got cotton mouth.
You should always smoke the big one.
Yeah, no, definitely did what you were supposed to do.
So nitrogen, people, nitrogen's a big one that people come at me and talk to me quite a bit about. I'm learning the importance of blood meal a lot more, in the sense that blood meal is a very active source of nitrogen that's not going to affect too much of your compost variety. And again, just throwing too much manure in there, I've learned that it's just not the way to do it. You get fall taste. It turns your soil to a different realm that is just not that enjoyable. And so having properly composted materials, and that's where a good worm cast company that actually works with these different manures and breaks them down, then you can avoid having that extra sulfur and extra nitrates and different things that you don't want in there. Yeah, and you know, paying attention. If you buy yourself a piece of land, you know that's an investment. And so, if you're going to start gardening on the land and actually growing successful crops, you know, you want to pay attention to what's happening to your land over the years, and seek out these sources and come up with a plan that you're going to layer out your layers. So at the end of the year, it's nice to just be able to chop down what you can and let that break down in there, and then get some more compost manure variety and some mulch layers. Mulch can just be stick matter. You know, you don't have to have proper mulch. You could just take up some nice sticks and break those up and layer those in there, and you'd be amazed at how much things can get broken down over the winter, and especially in the state of Michigan. It actually is quite exciting to me every single year to see how fast, you know, what I put in my bed, because I'll literally throw 2, 3, 4 inches of material, all kinds of food scraps, green scraps, just all over my garden bed, and by the end of the winter you can't even see them anymore. It's just completely broken down and into the soil. So spending that extra time investing in your land and keeping up with the value will assure you success in the long run. I've been working pots, like most of us. You know, we garden using grow pots and things like that. And so it costs a lot of money. Soil is extremely expensive. So learning to work with your land and build some of your own resources can save you a ton of money and stress in the long run. And especially if you want to just grow straight in the ground, then it's amazing how much it's going to take you a few years if you buy a fresh piece of property that nobody's ever grown on. And you know, like if we wanted to grow in this grass right here, you know, it would take us a few years to properly build it up. But after a couple of years, if you just consistently adding compost and mulch layers and different sources of minerals come from rocks. So you can find different rocks like throughout the year. You know, you might just drive by a place that has some rock matter, but you should question where things came from, of course, too. But getting different granite materials. Granite has a ton of essential mineral variety in it. Granite's the easiest, rock that we can get. So adding granite chunks to your land, will be a big benefit there. We're talking about soil health here, so if you have any questions, I was curious if anybody here had some land that they're trying to work with. And my land, I'll just talk about that. I bought 20 acres west of here, extremely sandy. It has good mineral content value in the sense that there is mineral value in there, but it only had 2.8% organic matter and good pH. And so it's pretty simple in a sense for me that all I have to do with that one is really just add manure and compost variety and mulching. And so what I've started there is some hugelculture beds. Hugelculturing is a process of basically digging out the ground, mixing your native soil with different amendments and putting it all back in a trench. So it's basically growing in a great big trench. You could do hugel holes or hugel pits. I just got a tractor this year, so at the end of the year, I'm actually going to take my whole garden bed and dig it out and flip the whole thing and put more manure and a compost variety in there. This is my 3rd year on the land, and I could tell that I've been getting better, that my gardens have been improving for sure, and it's getting a lot simpler. But you'd be amazed at how much material you need just to start a regular raised bed garden. Whatever regular is in your mind, it's half the size of this tent even. It's amazing how much material you need. So saving money on that through the year is essential.
Do you think you'll get to the point where you won't need to till your garden in anymore?
Absolutely, yeah. That's the goal. Well, starting with a fresh piece of property, like I always say, like hugel is like it's low-till gardening in the sense that we're going to tear it up once or twice,
right.
And then after that you're going to leave it. But yeah, I have a few different garden beds, so the hugel trenches that I dug, we'll be able to just amend those for next year and just keep right on rolling with them because I dug those very, very hardy and filled them with a really nice compost variety, biochar, stick material. It had rabbit, chicken, alpaca, all the compost in there. And like I say, you want to mix it with your native soil too. It's a very important process in that matter because I see people they think that their soil is not good, so they want to just take it out and put some better soil or whatever in there. If you're going to start a raised bed, that's absolutely not the way to do it. If you're going to start a brand new raised bed, you should take at least the top 3 to 6 inches off your soil and mix it with all the material and then start it back up. And so you could do that by just throwing everything in your beds and then mixing it up throughout there. But plant health absolutely boils down to your soil. If the minute that you're having problems and your plant's starting to lose health, you're going to be susceptible to all kinds of issues from there. And so really staying up on a key healthy soil is been utmost importance for me. And having looked at so many different soil tests and getting a sense of where I like these numbers to be at, like, do you have 1,000 parts per million calcium in your soil, or do you have 5,000 parts per million in your soil? Based on the research that I've been doing, having 5,000 parts calcium in your soil is where you want to be. And most people don't have anywhere near that much soil. But if you're going to have that much calcium in your soil, then we're going to have to bring up your magnesium and your potassium and your phosphates as well, because it's a perfect balance. It's about 60% calcium, and then another 5 to 10% magnesium, up to 5% phosphates and potassium. And then you want your organic matter to be right around 30%. You could be high in the organic, it's not going to matter. You just want to make sure exchange capacity and your pH don't fluctuate too much from there. But having every time that I know I'm in a proper, healthy, nutrient-rich soil, I could put my plants in there and they just explode with health with very, very little work at all. Just, sticking up with water in them. other thing is tomorrow I'm going to talk about water, and so in our feed programs, you can actually throw your soil off by, using different amendments, and especially different salt amendments will build up in there. And that was kind of what I was getting at with the sulfur and the sodium. If you're using some funky feeds, those funky feeds will build up in your soil over time too. And so if you're going to reuse that soil, it could be detrimental to your plant health. So it just shows the importance of using organics. I've learned to just avoid those funky things. I've had people tell me it's a terpene booster or whatever, and it just doesn't. If you're trying to run a healthy soil program, learning to just work with a healthy soil, very minimal liquid amendments, some tea, some teas from there to help boost your plants along. Because, for example, you want your soil to start with a decent nitrogen value in it. But over the course of that life of the plant, once it's done flowering, you don't want it to be rich in nitrogen anymore. And so that's in my mind, that overall just stresses the importance of understanding, what mineral amendments that your plant's uptaking and that they're going to be needed over time. Any other questions?
Talked a lot about using what you had for organic matter, but do you plant any biodynamic accumulators or cover crop, or what would you suggest for that?
Yeah, exactly. So I try to grow. This year I actually went with a native prairie mix, and so having different nettles, comfrey, clover. But the main thing is with your cover crop is you want to grow it, but you also want to cut it. You want to cut it back. And so cover crop is a bear in that sense. But you want to keep, I like to keep a rich cover crop in the sense that I don't just stick with one variety. I like a nice heavy mix. So the grasses are really nice because they don't get too big. I try to avoid huge plants in my cover crop. So just sticking with a native grassy mix or herbal mix, they help play a role. The other thing with cover crop is you can almost always identify a pest problem in your cover crop. People don't look at it that way often, but the pest problems identify themselves in your cover crop immediately. And if I identify a pest problem in my cover crop, then I'll literally start pulling it out sometimes and just get it out of there and start a new one. But you don't want them to harbor down in your cover crop either. So learning to turn it over. If you did have a pest problem in your soil, here's something that's interesting. People think I got to get rid of that soil. The importance of having a compost ring on your property is exactly that. You could put your soil in there, and if you're adding compost and materials and you're recooking that soil, then you can actually you can correct pest problems absolutely through composting. Pest problems are everywhere. Pest problems is a natural occurrence. We think that we just bring them on because we suck or something like that, but no, they're just natural. So we have to learn how to find them and learn how to identify them and deal with it from there. And so composting your soil that's how companies get rid of a pest problem, is through composting a soil. And if the soil isn't properly composted, or the material isn't properly composted, then you could have a pest problem from the beginning. And that's every major soil company, I hate to say it, but having owned a store, I've heard horror stories on a lot of different soil brands, and this for various occurrences.